28 years later is now in the works, and the franchise's new trilogy was actually teased by a single line from the original movie. 28 Years Later is the legacy sequel to the beloved zombie movies 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later, with the upcoming film kicking off a new batch of movies from the franchise. While it was uncertain if another movie in the 28 Days Later franchise would ever happen, it seems obvious that 28 Years Later is now happening when looking back on its predecessors, with one line teasing this perfect sequel. 28 Days Later was the immensely successful 2022 horror film that revitalized the zombie genre, with it kicking off a massive swatch of knockoffs and homages. 28 Days Later got a sequel of its own in 2007 when 28 Weeks Later was released, and while the film was successful, it took nearly 2 decades for a third film to be announced. 28 Years Later has been teased for a long time, with the creatives involved in the first 2 films hinting that they were eager to bring the franchise back. However, 28 Years Later is finally on the way. 28 Days Later teased a much bigger story beyond the United Kingdom. Cillian Murphy walking through a deserted London street in 28 Days Later. 28 Days Later focused on a zombie virus that quickly overtook Great Britain upon it being released, with it affecting millions of people. However, the scale of the original movie was fairly small, with it focusing on Jim and a handful of other survivors as they attempt to find shelter from the rage virus apocalypse. While there are talks of the rage virus spreading far beyond Cambridge, where it was initially released, 28 Days Later entirely takes place within the United Kingdom, with the film leaving the condition of the outside world up in the air. However, there are some hints as to what the rest of the world is like in 28 Days Later. At one point in the film, a 28 Days Later character mentions that there were reports of infection in Paris and New York. We didn't hear anything more after that. This clearly suggests that the rage virus has spread to both France and the United States, meaning that the franchise contains a much bigger story that takes place beyond the United Kingdom. This has made many fans excited to see how the rest of the world has handled the rage virus, although no more updates have been given. 28 Weeks Later also set up an international sequel. When 28 Days Later finally got a sequel in the form of 28 Weeks Later, many fans of the franchise were excited to see the film finally explore the world outside of the United Kingdom. However, this didn't end up happening, with 28 Weeks Later instead taking place in and around London. This made 28 Weeks Later feel like a bit of a retread of the first film, as there were so many other options for the sequel to explore. However, 28 Weeks Later did set up an international sequel once again. 28 Weeks Later ends on a major cliffhanger, one that can finally be paid off in 28 Years Later. The film concludes with the survivors being flown to France, seemingly escaping the rage virus. However, the film then flashes forward to another 28 Days Later, with a group of infected appearing in a Paris metro station. This officially confirms that rage zombies are in France, with the film presumably intending for a sequel to carry on this terrifying story. Luckily, 28 Years Later can finally pay this tease off. 28 Years Later's new trilogy must go beyond London and the UK. Brendan Gleeson, Cillian Murphy, and Naomi Harris in 28 Days Later. Now that 28 Days Later is back, the new trilogy needs to make a major change by going beyond London and the UK. There isn't much left for the franchise to explore within the UK, meaning that 28 Years Later ought to finally pay off these international teases and explore how other countries have dealt with the rage virus. Setting 28 Years Later in Paris, New York, or any of the other major cities that could be facing the rage virus would be a fantastic way to reinvigorate the franchise. It would be interesting to see how the world's various governments have responded to the apocalypse, with landmarks like the Statue of Liberty and the Eiffel Tower making fun set pieces. While there are still very few details revealed about the story of 28 Years Later, hopefully it will pull off this major location switch.